Hello everybody and welcome to this week's episode of Activist Lawyer. Thank you very much for joining us again. I am here today on a lovely, it's always sunny when I'm in this studio, funny enough, and I'm in our Granite podcast studio in Newry City, and today I am joined by Aonghus Kelly. Hi Aonghus.
How's it going? How are you?
I am good. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
We have a lot to talk about today, and we've already had a few good chats. We have a bit in common. Haven't gone to Galway before for our studies, so we'll get to that a little bit. But just by way of introduction to our listeners, and this is quite long, but
too long. Sounds pompous.
It does not sound pompous. It sounds extremely impressive. I look at this and I think, where did I go wrong?
Not at all.
So first and foremost, we'll introduce you as the Executive Director of the Irish Rule of Law International, which is an initiative of the Law Society of Ireland, the Bar of Ireland, and the Law Society of Northern Ireland, which is fantastic, and the Bar of Northern Ireland too. So that's fantastic. Dedicated to promoting the rule of law. So perfect fit for this podcast. And the organisation seeks to harness the skills of Irish and Northern Irish lawyers in using the law as a means of tackling global injustice and empowering all people to live in a society free from inequality, corruption and conflict. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But prior to taking up that position, you have a huge, vast experience working in international settings, covering war crimes, organised crime cases, including the Prosecutor's Office of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Special Prosecutor's Office in Kosovo, and you worked as a defence lawyer at the UN-run Extraordinary Chambers of the Courts in Cambodia, the ECCC, often known as the Khmer Rouge Tribunal. You worked with the European Union in Libya on criminal justice matters, and you're also a member of the Legal Action Committee of an organisation that I've been looking up recently, so it's great to have you here about that too, which is GLAN, the Global Legal Action Network. You went to University College Cork and Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand, and the Irish Centre of Human Rights at my old place, the National University of Ireland, Galway. So we had a wee chat there about Galway. So you have also been admitted to practice in 5 jurisdictions. Those are Ireland, New Zealand, England and Wales, Cambodia and Northern Ireland. So thank you again for joining us today. So thanks. I think what we'll do first and foremost, I guess with our listeners, we've discovered that people are interested in finding out more about our guest's background. So maybe take us a little bit back in time about maybe why you wanted to study law, I suppose, bringing us right up to your current position. We'll talk a little bit more about your substantive work in the middle.
Yeah, I suppose, why did I want to become a lawyer? I come from a line of medical people. My dad was a doctor, my granddad was a doctor, 2 of my uncles, 2 of my aunts, about 5 of my cousins, my brother, my mother's a radiographer, my sister-in-law is a nurse, so there's a lot of medical people in my family. And I suppose that I liked English and history in school, and I liked, my friends would regularly quote me even now in our early 40s when I walk into the bar or the pub, they'd say debatable and controversial because he's always looking for an argument about something. But yeah, so I suppose I enjoyed that, and I used to go down, my dad used to give medical legal evidence in the courts, so when the High Court came to Galway or in Circuit Court, and he'd be doing reports and stuff, so I would have gone in to watch him, and I always liked the atmosphere. And I liked going to court, and I was interested in debate, and I was in debating both in Irish and in English, and so it was something that I was interested in, and I liked, I suppose, those subjects in school, English and history in particular, which kind of lead into it. And so I went to Cork and studied it. I actually, to be frank, I wanted to go to UCD, and I missed. I was repeating my Leaving Cert for about 3 weeks, and I got rechecks done, and I got marked up, 10 points, and I needed 15 points to get into UCD, so I got into UCC, and I mulled over for a few days, and the prospect of repeating one's Leaving Cert is never a great one for anyone.
Oh no.
And it was all even weirder for me because I'd been in boarding school, and I was coming back to live in Galway, and I wasn't going to play any sport, which I still love doing, and I loved even more then, and but I went to Cork, and it was the best decision I ever made. And people go, why? And people go, why do you think that? And I says, well, if I'd gone to Dublin, I just would have hung out with guys from home or from boarding school that I knew very well. I would have hung out with the same group of people in a city I knew pretty well because I was in boarding school near Dublin. And Dublin is the capital of the Republic, so I would have ended up there at some stage probably, and instead I went to Cork, which is a place that I still love very much. My brother lives there, I have an immense amount of friends there, I have a great grá for UCC, so it was the best decision I ever made, I have to say.
Good. That's fantastic.
And a great law school, I have to say as well. Great lecturers and great university and great atmosphere. And yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. I think we'll have a guest from the law faculty coming on to join us very soon. So that's fantastic. But then you did your master's in NUIG. That was the master's in human rights law. Was that the one connected to Queen's or?
No, it was the same. Well, there was an an introductory phrase to that, which was. There was an introductory phrase as regards that, which was I worked in a law firm kind of as a gopher, compiling briefs and looking at videos of evidence and stuff like that in Dublin for a year as I saved money to go travelling. And I went to New Zealand for 4 months, but I ended up staying 4 years, as you do.
As you do.
And basically that came from a funny scenario of having a row with my father, God rest his soul, about him saying that I should come home and I should either finish I'd done some of the FE1s to become a solicitor or do the bar, and me saying, no, I'm not coming home. And he was like, well, then you should do them over there. There was it was a more heated conversation than that. And then the next day, a lady walked into the bar and paid for her drinks with a credit card which had the Law Society of Ireland Blackhall Place across the front of it. And I said to her, you're a long way from Blackhall Place. And she started laughing at me and we started having a chat. And I said to her, actually, I was just on the internet last night and I see there's an agreement between the Law Society of New Zealand and the Law Society of Ireland as regards a cross-qualification. And she started laughing. She says, I was the first person to ever do that. And that lady, Therese Singleton, kind of became my mentor. I suppose in some way she still is. She's still, when we have chats via message or on the phone or whatever, she's still giving me hassle because she's a mighty woman, as they say out west, and she'd be taking none of my messing. So I've a lot to. I owe her and her husband Justin a lot because they helped me out a lot at that time. And so I qualified there, and the professions are fused there. So you do have what they call barrister souls, but everyone qualifies together. Everyone does the same studies, and the rights of audience and everything are the same. So it's a very similar system to our systems on this island, but very far away, obviously, but a little bit different as well. And also issues because of the treaty between the indigenous people, between the Maori and the British government back in 1845, and the land issues mean that it has its own peculiarities, which are very interesting. It's an amazing country, though, I have to say. Yeah. Of all the countries I've lived, it's my favourite. It's incredibly beautiful. The people are great. It's a great way of life. I have a big aroha nui, as they say, big love for the place. Yeah. And so much in common with Ireland. My brother's over there actually in New Zealand, just a shout out to him. But it's absolutely, I can't wait to visit. But so you're also a member of the Legal Action Committee of the Global Legal Action Network, GLAN, that I mentioned at the beginning. And this is an organisation that we actually, just when we were doing research for Activist Lawyer and getting to grips with what's going on in terms of various other, I suppose, areas of law, we came across GLAN and I was reading it and I recognised one or two of the people that are just from Galway days as well. Galway is a great place. So how are you involved in that, or is that something that can tie in with your current work? Well, I'm actually on the Legal Action Committee, so I'm kind of, it's a volunteer position, if you will, and I just kind of feed in for bits and pieces on cases as needed. You've incredibly interesting, much more qualified and much more intelligent people working on a lot of their cases. But they're an amazing organisation. They're based in Galway. They used to be in London, but then they still have an office in London. But they have basically lawyers working all over the world on strategic litigation cases, everything from cotton production using forced labour in Uzbekistan to massive big climate change cases representing a number of Portuguese children that's going to Europe, and like looking at land being taken off poor people in the Caribbean, to looking at the situation in the Philippines, to looking at the situation in Bahrain. Amazing work. Garodo Queen, the director, is a good friend of mine, and he's a great guy, and the team, him and Jerry and Valentin and the rest of the team are doing amazing work. And I'm actually hoping to see a few of them this weekend when I go down to Galway, hopefully. So yeah, GLAN is amazing work, and that side of things, as I said, the environmental, the climate change, the business human rights side of things, I think that is really, really interesting and really, really powerful and really, really useful for lawyers to get involved in that arena. And there's a lot of movement in that regard, and I would have a go look at GLAN's website. Yeah, they do really, really amazing. So
that's the Global Legal Action Network. Yeah. Definitely one to watch. So people normally, I think, make the choice between travel or staying here to do their, qualify or do extra exams or wait till that's over. But really what struck me with you is you really did both. And, you know, you travelled extensively. So there you are, you qualified in New Zealand. What steps did you take next? Or, you know, did you intend to come home, settle down here, or how did you move into other jurisdictions?
I came home then because, you know, I was just talking to the very nice lady, Australian lady at reception, the Bar Council of Northern Ireland yesterday about this. She said to me, why did you leave? And I said, I honestly left after 4 years because I knew if I stayed any longer, I'd never have left.
Yeah, really. And
I went back there in 2019. I kind of took, I'll come back to this probably later on. I kind of took a year out while I was doing some some pro bono work with Glon. But I travelled for a year after I finished in Libya, Tunisia. And I went back to New Zealand for the first time in 13 years. And I spent 31 nights there, I think. A friend of mine who was one of the original 5 of us that went down there, we went back and he did 2 weeks of it and I spent the rest of it on my own. But of the 31 nights I spent there, 28 of them I spent with friends in various places all around the North Island. And I ended the trip going, I love this country so much. Yeah. So a part of me is a little bit sad I left, but I left because one of the things that makes New Zealand amazing is it's so far away from everywhere. Yeah. And that makes it very unique. It's the last place, apart from Antarctica, but I suppose the last really habitable place that was inhabited by humans in the 11th or 12th century. So, you know, it's a very, very special place, but it's very far away from everywhere. And I knew that I wanted to see more places and visit more places, so I came back to Ireland and I did after having qualified in New Zealand and become a barrister and solicitor there, I cross-qualified. I did the QLTTs, the Qualified Lawyers Transfer Tests, at the Law Society, and I started working as a solicitor in Galway in Blake and Kenny Solicitors, where I stayed for 2 years, and I was doing general practice, but, you know, as I mentioned earlier on, everything from fisheries cases to buying and selling houses to probate to kind of minor criminal matters to family law to judicial review, a bit of everything, and it was amazing. I loved the place. I still do. I still meet a lot of my former colleagues there for a cup of tea or for lunch or whatever, and my former boss, Michael Malloy, is an amazing guy, so I was very, very lucky. I loved that place. I still do. Amazing atmosphere in that office. So but while I was there, I had the good fortune to go to NUIG, and this was very easy for me. I still call it UCG because I'm that old. That to me, it's UCG. And
UCG? What?
Yeah. Well, you see, I think UCG is.
I obviously just got in there when it was.
Well, UCG is a much better name in my mind to NUIG. It's too many. It's a letter too far. Like UCC, UCG, UCD. It sounds better to me. But anyway. That's my bias potentially. But I had the good fortune that my boss, Michael, who I mentioned, was very. I said, look, Michael, I want to do this master's, and it basically meant that I would have to go over to cross. It was only across the bridge because we were on St. Francis Street, and it was just over the Salmon Weir Bridge, the Irish Centre for Human Rights, just by the courthouse there, by the cathedral. So I'd slip over there for my lectures and come back to work, and I was working less hours during the week. And I remember saying to him, you should cut my pay. And he said, no, I'm not cutting your pay. And I said, but I'm working less hours, Mike. And he was like, no, you're going doing that. And I always, like many things, he was very wise and he gave me a lot of wisdom over the years. But that one, not just that one, but that helped me that was his way. He was and is a very decent man.
That is decent.
Yeah. So,
especially when you're trying to balance both, I suppose, with work.
Sure.
And that's fantastic. And then, so how long did that took? 2 years, was it? Or
no, I did it over a year because I did it as a full time, and that's so I was I was just talking to Professor Shane Darcy, who works at the Irish Centre for Human Rights the other day about this, because I was back home in Galway, and a little bit of me regrets that I didn't get to go to a lot of the lunchtime lectures and the extra lectures I could have done if I was a full time student. But that being said, I wouldn't have got the hands on experience in a domestic setting, and I always and I know we discussed beforehand potentially advice to people. One of the things I would always say to people, to young lawyers, if they want to work internationally, is go work in your domestic system for a few years if you can, because it will give you skills, it will give you a reality check, it will also help you understand how a system works. And when you're working in fragile countries where the systems don't work as well, it gives you a foundation. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. So I did my master's, and then I went over to England. I basically, like a lot of people in this field, like a lot of people in life, I had to go do an internship for free, and that's not an easy thing to do. People thought I was crazy, giving up a good job as a solicitor, to go work for free. But I went over there to work for a firm that took judicial review cases, a lot of judicial review cases, domestic stuff within the UK, but also international stuff. So I did a lot of work in Iraq and Palestine in particular.
Okay, so that was an internship was that with an organisation or?
No, it was with a law firm.
With
It was a law firm. Yeah. So.
Okay, and tell us a little bit more. Some of those cases sound quite interesting, and I suppose they're quite close to home in terms of when we think about here, and then obviously very much an international setting too. So how did you find that work?
It was really interesting. It was kind of my first non-academic introduction to the international world, even though it was very much focused on kind of British domestic legislation, because we were looking at judicial review of government actions by, for instance, licensing authorities on weapons sales.
Right.
But also the court-martial system in the British Army and how that was working, and decisions that were made by the prosecuting authorities there. And then that led on to a public inquiry. So the firm was based in Birmingham, but I went down to London, and I was in London for a year working at the Bahamousa inquiry. So, yeah.
Gosh, right. So that gave you a really good footing, I suppose, to get, build your, I suppose, portfolio and experience in terms of international law. Was that internship then what opened the door for you to go and work in Cambodia and the other countries that you?
Well, you see, I was really lucky in that, and, this is always the risk one takes, but, it's a kind of, it's a calculated risk, if you will, that I said, look, I'll go over there, I'll do the internship. And the plan was to then go and do, to work in Palestine, and I had an internship lined up there. And I would do this one temporarily just to get a bit of experience. But then I got offered a job, and I mulled over that a lot. And I still, to my dying day, I think part of me will always be a bit sad that I haven't got to live and work in Palestine, because it's a place that, the situation there is something that affects me on a daily basis. I think about it I think about it regularly. I think about not just Palestine, other places as well, places like the Western Sahara, like West Papua, like a lot of conflict and post-conflict zones there. Having had the good fortune to visit some of those places and live in some of those in places like that. The things that I think about a lot. So I got, after I think it was 6 or 7 weeks, I got offered a job there. So I took the job. I mulled over it a lot, but I took the job because I thought, well, this will give me the capacity to do, as you've just mentioned, to move on and do other things at a later date. So I spent 2 years there, and then I moved to Bosnia. So,
okay.
yeah.
And so when you went to Bosnia, you worked with the Special Prosecutor's Office?
Well, it was it was the state prosecutor's office, just focused on the war crimes office. So I was working on war crimes in Bosnia. So basically, the system was set up there. It's actually Paddy Ashdown, who was the high rep. It was born just up the road from where we are now, and he had said there was a lot of a lot of people would have heard of what's colloquially called the Hague Tribunal, but the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, where a lot of very famous figures, political and military and civilian, also were tried across the wars, from the wars in Croatia, Bosnia, Kosovo, Macedonia. And that was the high level guys. Now at the start they did some lower and medium level people, mostly, and I say guys, and that most of them, over 90% of them were men. But there was no one doing the mid-ranking guys and the lower level guys. So Paddy Ashdown, in his wisdom, I think it was great wisdom and bravery, pushed really hard for a state court to be set up in Bosnia. Bosnia is a very fractured country. It still is, unfortunately. I was there a few weeks ago, and I loved the place. Amazing! It's an amazing place. I really deeply love the place, and I have amazing friends there. But it's a very troubled place. One of my friends just said to me the other day, she said, I hadn't been back in 6 years, and she said to me, how do you find it being back? And I said, it's great to see you all. And she said, what do you think of the place? And I said, well, it looks the same. And she said, that's kind of worrying though, isn't it? And I said, yeah, it is. Because I've, also been recently enough to Belgrade and to Pristina and to Croatia, and those places have changed.
Yeah,
now,
but it hasn't.
But it hasn't, and that worries me a lot.
Worrying. Yeah.
So, but Bosnia was amazing. I worked on a team. My boss was an American lawyer. I worked with another American lawyer, with local colleagues. We had investigators from England and Switzerland, and it was great. We did, to say it's great, I suppose it's probably a bad choice of words, but it was amazingly interesting. It was very troubling, though. We were investigating crimes from 1995 in Srebrenica, from the genocide. So we're doing crimes against humanity, war crimes,
Quite
and
intense,
genocide
yeah.
cases. So, and it was very much, a little bit different from our systems on our island, in that it was more like the American system, and the Americans had brought in that system. Well, the international community brought in that system, so we were involved from the initiation of the case.
Okay.
So the whole way running through it and planning the whole investigation and ordering the police what to do, and our investigative team as well. So really fascinating. And then also liaising with The Hague, with the tribunal in The Hague, and the teams up there working on this.
It's really interesting, and getting to meet people from, I suppose, all backgrounds.
Yep.
So then, did that lead into you, how did you get involved then in Cambodia? Because I'd say that was probably as intense. And
yeah, well, there was Kosovo in between. And Kosovo, basically the reason I left Bosnia, I still think of all my, the atmosphere in Galway was amazing. Bosnia was probably my favourite job, I have to say, in many ways, because it was really tangible and functional, and it was a great place to live, and it was, learning a lot. But we were there at the grace and favour of the Bosnian state. So we were employees of the Bosnian state, but our wages were paid by the international community.
I see.
But there was a movement on to get rid of us. Basically, a lot of the powers that be, the justice sector, the criminal justice sector in general, but the criminal justice sector in particular, is a very sensitive topic in any jurisdiction. And having foreigners sitting amidst them, like imagine if there was a load of people from Vanuatu or Kiribati or wherever sitting in the PPS in Belfast, or in the DPP's office in Dublin, or in the CPS in London, people wouldn't be particularly happy about it. So it was a very sensitive topic.
Absolutely.
But in a fractured state with all kinds of issues, like in Bosnia, the idea, in many ways, I think the idea was that it was less problematic, it was less easier to threaten us, etc., to corrupt us in whatever form that might come. But there was big pressure internally from the political leaders in Bosnia to get rid of us. They'd already got rid of the equivalents of us in the corruption side of the house, and they wanted to get rid of us in the war crime side of the house. And of course, in a lot of these situations, the people who are involved in corruption and organised crime are also similar people who are involved in war crimes laterally. So there's a big relationship, and in that transfer over, you'll see that in conflict and post-conflict zones around the world. So I basically jumped before I was pushed, because I knew the mandate was coming to an end. And I'd been there for 2.5 years. So towards the end of 2012, I moved to Kosovo. I moved down to work for the European Union Rule of Law Mission in Kosovo. It's a very long title. It's often shortened to ULEX. And I worked at the Special Prosecutor's Office. And that was an amazing experience as well. Very similar issues in many ways. It was in the same country for nearly 70 years in essence. So in that country, the former Yugoslavia's various formats. It was a kingdom beforehand, but so there was a lot of similar issues. But I wasn't just doing war crimes there; I was also doing organised crime. So that gave it a corruption, organised crime, terrorism, war crimes. So that gave it a very different flavour. So like I worked on a lot of really interesting cases there. I mentioned the war crimes cases in Bosnia, which were very affecting and troubling. I worked on war crimes cases in Kosovo as well, very affecting and troubling. Much like in Bosnia, I think one of the biggest issues, that it was one of the most troubling issues in many ways, was the fact that you knew who had committed the crimes, and you could tell, you knew where the people who'd done it were. But because of the vagaries of extradition or non-extradition between the states and the former Yugoslavia, there's no prospect of an extradition. What made it even more complicated in Kosovo is the fact that Kosovo, under the old Yugoslav system, was a special administrative region, like Vojvodina, as part of Serbia. So while Bosnia was a separate republic and therefore seceded and was recognized as a state, Kosovo has not been recognised by Serbia, which it was previously part of, nor by half of the international community. So about 100 countries recognise Kosovo and 100 countries don't recognise Kosovo. And that made things even more complicated than normal. So on war crimes, I mentioned that was difficult. That was also difficult in Bosnia, in fairness. But I did a lot of organised crime cases. I worked on the medics cases, which involved organ trafficking. And we had witnesses, people giving us evidence from 18 different jurisdictions, I think was the number we came to. So, and then half of those countries didn't recognise Kosovo, so then you'd have to be running documentation through the UN, because they had the authority, they were recognised by those states as being the authoritative force within Kosovo. So just very bureaucratic at times.
So much ready. I'm just thinking it's so complex in terms of, getting the work done. And I guess that's the reason why the tribunals, they go on for so long as well, when you have that international element there, and as you said, different people working on it from different backgrounds. It sounds like it also quells your kind of your thirst or your your love of history as well, because you obviously know a lot about the background. Obviously you have to when you're working in it, but I guess that's what makes it interesting too, in terms of you're kind of ticking both boxes as such. It's no surprise then that you continue to work in the international law arena, and very much in a hands-on way here, I suppose. I'm so interested in finding out more about your role with the Irish Rule of Law International.
Yeah, well, I'm very lucky to be able to do that, although I do a lot of I probably don't do as much law as I would like. One of the things I miss actually doing casework, and I won't lie. Practicing, I won't lie about that. It's kind of an open.
Can you fit it in?
Yeah. Well, there's only so many hours in the day, but I do. I'm very enthusiastic, and I find that really interesting. And in an ideal world, that's something that I would get back to a bit later on. But the organisation it basically was set up. It flows from the work of a lot of people who, lawyers mostly down in Dublin, who had kind of family and cultural connections to South Africa, particularly Michael Irvine and Mr. Justice Barneville, who were, down in Dublin, who kind of birthed the child that is IRLI, and did work with upskilling of lawyers from historically disadvantaged backgrounds, mostly black lawyers in South Africa in the late 90s and early 2000s, and then the organisation grew, and then there was a structure put on it in 2007, and then in 2009 it was set up as a company limited by guarantee and a charity under the auspices of the Law Society of Ireland and the Bar of Ireland, who we've always had great support from. Where our offices are in the Distillery building, where a lot of the barristers are based in Dublin, and then we've had great assistance with the Law Society over the years, both in benefit in kind, if you will, for want of a better term, but also financially. And then in 2015, the Law Society of Northern Ireland, the Bar of Northern Ireland, joined the organisation as kind of foundational partners, if you will. So that project in South Africa, upskilling lawyers in the kind of commercial side of things and drafting, I sit in some of the meetings, and then I think I kind of a little bit lost, I won't lie, but then I think of, oh yes, I remember that one from commercial law class in 1999 or company law class in 2000. Yeah. But that's ongoing. We should be doing that in person, and some of our trainers who are solicitors and barristers in the island of Ireland will go down and do that training course, but we've had to move it online because of the vagaries of the pandemic.
Sure.
We've great assistance there from Matheson, who sponsor that program and help us there, then we have another project. Our biggest project is in Malawi, where we have 6 lawyers on the ground working there. We have a lawyer, it's an access to justice program that's funded by the Irish Embassy in Malawi, so by Irish Aid, by the Department of Foreign Affairs. And it previously was funded also by the European Union. And that does work on a whole host of fields and on access to justice kind of things. We have a lawyer embedded with the Director of Public Prosecutions, one working with the Legal Aid Bureau, the Defence, one working with the judiciary, one working with the Malawi Police Service, one working doing a lot of kind of office stuff, but also working a lot on child diversion, so taking kids out of the criminal justice system and trying to upskill them and take them out of adult prisons, etc., or children's reformatory institutions, and then we have our country program manager. So they're working a lot on people say, well, what kind of work are they doing? Well, things like, there's an issue in certain parts of Malawi, women being imprisoned for infanticide, for killing their own child, when a lot of the time they've had a miscarriage or a stillborn child.
Gosh.
And then they're put in prison, and then they don't have proper representation, and there's issues with lack of representation. And we've work done by my amazing colleagues down in the team in Malawi who've got those ladies out of prison, and a lot of them are very young teenagers, girls, or some young women with girls, and they've very great suspicions of the authorities, etc., and they're not well educated. And we do a lot of work on bail applications for Amandis who've been charged with homicide, but also other crimes. Some of them have been in prison for many, many years, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Do a lot of work also then on upskilling the police prosecutors, so a bit like what the Magistrates Court used to be here and what the District Court still is in the Republic, in that the police do the prosecutions, but not just on relatively minor offences, on serious offences, right up to sexual assault and rape. So it's upskilling those training them, the police prosecutors, also working with the magistrates to give them extra training and assistance. And then and doing a lot of what we call camp courts, where they go to they get the judges to go to the prison and deal with a lot of these remandees who've been in prison for several years. So really amazing work.
Really amazing work, really hands-on, and obviously a very effective organisation. What really strikes me though is that it's made up of lawyers from across this island.
Yeah.
How important do you think that is in terms of having that kind of blend of experience and, you know, kind of centralising our skills and our talent and harnessing it in one place when it comes to that type of work?
Well, you know, as I just mentioned, I go up every month. I come up to Belfast every month and meet up with our colleagues from the Bar and the Law Society, and also with the PSNI, the Tanzania project, where we are working. Again, it's funded by Irish Aid through the Irish Embassy in Dar es Salaam, but that is utilising. There's kind of two strands to it. One is is run by our local colleagues, the Children's Dignity Forum, CDF. And then the second side is usually the experience, the expertise and knowledge of criminal justice actors here, so judiciary and police in particular, from both the Republic and from Northern Ireland. And so, for instance, I've gone over to Tanzania now. I haven't been over in nearly 2 years because of COVID again. Yeah. But we're going to have a conference, and there's going to be virtual, some of the judges and police officers from this part of the world going in, speaking virtually to the participants of the conferences. And then also we've had the police over here 2 years ago, just before the pandemic. So that cross-border element is very, very important. It's also I think it's important internally for us as legal professionals across the island. In my own view, there's not enough interaction between the legal professions across the island. So as part of that action, and there's a lot of enthusiasm both in the Law Society and the Bar in Dublin, but also the Law Society and the Bar in Belfast to do that. So it's really helpful, and we've great assistance from all the various criminal justice actors and the wider legal community. And I think that's really important, and there's immense possibilities. The Zambia project, hopefully we're going to start later this year, which will be funded by the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, in essence, through their Rule of Law Expertise UK fund that's managed by Advocates for International Development, who are the much bigger version of IRLI in Britain, and they're great colleagues and partners and have helped to us. So that project is, again, using experiences from actors both in Republic and Northern Ireland. And it's also utilising the experience of colleagues and the work we've been doing in child diversion in Malawi, because there's a big issue in Zambia with child justice, with children going to prisons, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of tying up or joining up those dots, if you will, between the various actors. As regards, the question, I suppose I'm being very long-winded, as usually the case. I'm afraid I'm trying to speak slowly, though.
You're doing fine.
My mother will be she will be listening to this and give me, say I sound like a turkey cock because I'm speaking too quickly. But I think the space, if you want to call it the international law space, the pro bono space, is something that needs to be mined. And if you look at the legal law firms in Britain or in the US or in Australia, there's a big history, like there is on this island, of pro bono work by lawyers, but they've also got they're doing a lot of it internationally, and I think that's something we need to mine and utilise. I also think that there's a lot of possibilities here. There's the pro bono pledge in the Republic, which Free Legal Aid Centre, we're heavily involved. Rachel Powers, it's in our board of directors, are heavily involved in putting that together, and that's an aspirational target for lawyers.
And I think it's Pro Bono Week as well, isn't it, this week? Where we had the Pills, two guys from Pills on talking about that too, working closely with Pro Bono work from corporate law firms too. So
exactly.
That grows.
So, and I mentioned that Zambia project, that's done in conjunction with DLA Piper, who've just opened a big office relatively recently in Dublin. They have a big office. They're a big international firm. They're working with us on the Zambia project. So, and then hopefully, over the next few weeks, I've already given some talks to some of the firms around the island, and I'm going to talk to more of them about getting involved in doing pro bono work with us. Now, of course, there's immense possibilities, but also it comes back to the ability to manage those projects, and that's one of the things we're going to have to try and we can put in place lots of potential projects and look at stuff, but we also need to find a way of managing those projects internally within IRLA and having the funding to have people who can manage them. And that's doing good work is great, but you also need to do it properly, and you need to have people in there to manage it so that it works properly. So that's going to be one of the things we're going to be trying to focus on the next period of time. So
fantastic. What an organisation. And I love the whole concept of the cross-border element too. And we talked a little bit before we come on about the importance of cross-qualification, and you'd mentioned there seems to be a decrease in students coming from the north or vice versa to study. And I do recognise that. I think when I studied years and years and years ago, there were quite a few of us did come from this part of the world down to Galway, which is, quite random. It was random at the time. But I do feel, I agree with you, it seems to be getting less and less that people do cross the border, I guess, to study. How important do you think it is for, students or even institutes to have a cross-border relationship with other third level institutions?
Look, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I went forward for the election for the NUIG electoral authority there about 6 months ago it was, and I did it very late in the day. I saw the ads on LinkedIn and I went, maybe I should do that, and then I hummed and hawed about it, and then eventually I went, actually I will. And then my mother, again, in fairness to her, was great for ringing around getting people, and then I was annoying loads of people, sorry everyone, with all the messages asking them to vote for me. And I didn't get in, but I did pretty well. I got down to the 13th council. It was a 6th out of 20 candidates. But, one of the things I proposed was that there be a link up between, because Galway, traditionally NUIG has an immense amount of Donegal students, famously for Donegal Day.
What was the bus called? There's a big
Feed O'Donnell.
That's it.
Feed O'Donnell to go up to Donegal. But I said, NUIG should be looking seriously at doing should be seriously talking to the powers that be up in Derry about a cross-border kind of tie-up because of that on the Western Seaboard. Yeah. And, there's a lot of, rivalry between Belfast and Derry people feel left behind a little bit like people in the west of Ireland often do. So, tie that up, and, it's obviously a lot of work with NUIG, obviously with the Gaeltacht, particularly obviously with Connemara, but also with Mayo and Gweedore, so... and Glencullen Kill. So, I thought there was a lot of possibilities there. On look, I always think that the amount of people that I know in Northern Ireland who've never been to, less of them actually, that haven't been to the Republic, and way more people in the Republic who've never been to Northern Ireland. I'm like, it's just up the road. It's not the people up there. The people up there or down there do not have horns. It's all good.
They're all nice.
Yeah. So I just think that getting people to engage and talking to each other is really, really important, and that would be what people talking is a good thing.
It is.
So the more people we get to talk, and on the education side, my understanding, and I'm far from an expert, but my understanding from talking to people, much more educated people than I, is that it's much more difficult for people from Northern Ireland to get into university in the Republic because of the vagaries of the A levels versus the Leaving Cert.
Yeah.
And I understand Trinity has a kind of dispensation of sorts that's why they have more students. There's also a big tradition going back many years for people going to Trinity. But I think it's more difficult, and that's something, if I was in government, I would say, education system, this would be something we should be concentrating on, getting that flow of students back and forth between the two jurisdictions would be very useful, just for people to interact and engage.
Absolutely. And I think you working on kind of the international platform, that's a prime example of how this kind of cross-border and, cross, I suppose just from Northern Ireland or the island of Ireland speaking itself, will facilitate that work and will contribute to it in a very positive way. Yeah. So you're very firmly positioned in your role now. What's next for the organisation, for you, or how do you see things going forward? You're here.
Well, so I can talk a little bit more authoritatively than my musings now in the education system, which I'm Johnny come lately at best. We're putting in place. We had an organisation review several months ago, which was funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs, and we're very appreciative of that, and done by Azure Forum, who did some great work and continue to do some great work. So we're putting in place a lot of new practice and procedures and documents. My colleagues are doing immense work on that, James Douglas in particular, and so we're trying to get those building blocks improved. And then where I would like us to go, ideally, I think it'd be great if we could in the next few years do a few more projects. What they'll look like, open to question. We need to, the board needs to discuss, the organisation needs to discuss. Be great to do something in transitional justice, utilising the experiences of, I was talking to the bar and the law study about this the other day, or yesterday and the day before. The amount of incredible experience in this part of Ireland, in Northern Ireland, is immense. And if you look at the academic side of things, if you talk to international lawyers or international criminal law people, they'll all know about the troubles. They'll all know about the situation. There's an immense amount of academic knowledge within the universities in Northern Ireland. And I think that's something that we could look at, hopefully, and do something on. We'd like to improve and expand our programme in Malawi, and that's something we're working with the embassy, and they're being very helpful there. There's immense possibilities. At the same time, you have to be while you can have great thoughts and plans, you have to kind of try and build strategically and not get too ahead of yourself. So look, there's lots to do. There's lots going on. I'm very positive about it. I think there's a natural, honestly, one of the things I would say about traveling, and I was Judge Mary Rose Gearty, who used to sit on our board and has been hugely helpful, particularly in the Tanzania project, would say that her experience being out in Tanzania really showed her that the immense interest, respect, love people have around the world because you're Irish, because you're from this island, you know. And that, if you're Northern Irish, if you're Irish, that's a big bonus. And that allows you, when you're around the world, it gives you a big in with a lot of people. People have a natural, they smile when they hear you're from this island. And that's something that is really useful. And, you know, I think that's something we need to mine. And we have mined it. If you look around the world in various fields, we have mined that, whether it be entertainment or literature or business. And I think we need to do more of that in the law. And I think there's an immense amount of really great lawyers from our island. And it's one of the series we do on our social media accounts is profiling Irish and Northern Irish lawyers who are working, or Northern Irish lawyers and jurists, I should say, who are working or have worked abroad. And we do one every month. And part of the logic behind it is just to show our colleagues, the people we're representing across the various legal professional organisations in the island of Ireland, but also the wider community. Look at all these amazing people that have done or are doing this amazing work. So I think there's immense capacity there and immense potential. And I would like to, and I know that's very ambitious and broad brushstroke and big picture and, you know, perhaps even maybe too ethereal, but I really honestly think there's something to that. And I think we as legal professionals from across the island can do a lot more in this space. And I'd like to see us do that. And I really, I think we can.
Obviously, activism is part of your work as well. And I know you've a huge interest in it. And it's fantastic to have you on this podcast. And before we've spoken to people about, you know, the current challenges to the rule of law, again, which is probably why this podcast was set up in the first place. It was really to kind of defend, not to defend, but to have people who are working in areas like yourself, human rights, working with asylum and vulnerable people, you know, to really share their work. Obviously, we have lots of listeners here who will be very interested in your story and your journey. And I mean, your experience is vast, as we've said. You have, you know, practiced in a general practice as a solicitor, and you have also changed direction a number of times. Would you recommend your type of work, this line of work, working in international law, public interest law, and how would you advise somebody to get into it?
I would recommend it highly, but if you want to be a millionaire, probably not the wisest option. But if you want to have a really interesting, fulfilled life, I would recommend it highly, not without its challenges. And as I said, I think the area is not as developed on our island as it's not as easy to do it here as it would be if you're in Britain or in other countries. And that not just a size issue. Obviously, in a bigger country, it's easier usually for most those kind of things. But I also think it's not as developed. But that gives us an opportunity, as I mentioned. So I really enjoy it. But you know, I think the environmental side of things, the business and human rights side of things, is hugely interesting. And that's what I would, if people come, young lawyers do come to me and people are thinking about doing it, and I would say, they talk about international criminal law, and I would say, look, very interesting. Couldn't agree with you more. But if I was honestly advising you, I would look more at the business and human rights and environmental side of things, because I think it's more affecting.
Okay.
And I think it's one of the coming things. And I think it's hugely important for us as a species on the planet, because, you know, we need to change a lot of things. The climate change is driving wars, it's driving migration, it's driving massive changes in our lives, and lawyers can be very involved in addressing the issues that have come up. And I think that would be part of the advice I would give. Kind of more generally is, you have to take leaps of faith at times and just go for things. And sometimes you learn, you know, I always say sometimes you learn, this is something my father told me a long time ago, sometimes you learn as much from the things you don't like and the things that don't go well as you do from the things that do, because it teaches you what you like, what's important to you. And that's okay too. You don't have to take, every step doesn't have to be a sure-footed correct one. We all make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Then just more honestly, more practically, I would always say to people, languages. If you can learn languages, it's really helpful. Like, the more languages you have, the better. And it doesn't matter if the language is Yiddish or Aramaic or Syrian or Armenian or Chichewa. Languages broaden your mind. They broaden your ability to think. It make you think in a different way. So the more languages you speak, the better. Obviously, if you speak one of the UN languages like Hindi or Mandarin or Arabic or French or Spanish, that's really beneficial. And then, I would encourage people, to go for it. But I would also say something else that's important, which is the fact that, a lot of lawyers can, when they talk to you about this, they're like, oh, it's amazing the stuff you're doing, and I'm just doing this, and it's not that important. You're like, I am. And people go, you're just plum-mossing me, Aonghus. And I go, no, honestly, I believe that if you believe in the rule of law, if you believe in the system, it's like an ecosystem in the natural world, and every person is like a part of that ecosystem. Every type of law is a part of that ecosystem, and it has its part to play, and the lawyers working that, they have their part to play. So if you're doing, family law, which we were discussing earlier on, that's really tangible, important human rights issues at the most normal level. The most important courts on the island are the district court and the magistrates' courts, because they're dealing with the most people. And obviously they're not dealing with the high level stuff that we're talking about, but they're dealing really honestly with people's issues every single day. Now, as they move through the system, they get more complicated. You look at those things, they become more difficult. But daily interaction for most people, the most important issues are those small ones at the bottom. So I think they're really important. And then also, people who work in the commercial field can say, oh, but I'm very far away from that, I'm just doing this. And I'm like, yeah, but you have, for instance, on the environmental side, this is going to be a massive issue. ESG, side of thing, environmental, social, governmental issues, how they're advising companies so they can comply with environmental law, they comply with climate change regulation, comply with massive number of new directives that are going to come out from the EU. So these are all really important things. So I would say to people, don't be too dismissive of your part in that process, because you have a lot of power and influence too in your own particular field.
Such great advice. Well, look,
geez, I don't know if it is, but sure, I'm talking too much as always.
It is. I mean, it's so varied, and also we mentioned as well the opportunity and hopefully the growth in terms of pro bono work within some of the bigger organisations as well, which we're already seeing, which is really fantastic, to allow all practitioners the opportunity to get involved at all levels with that type of work. So, look, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much for having me. Much appreciated.
Joining us today in our studio. We really appreciate it, and we really will follow the work of your organisation and yourself with great interest over the next while, and hopefully you'll join us again.
Yes, I'd be happy to anytime. And I mentioned that is an important thing to you. Thank you for saying that, because I knew there was something I was supposed to add. That please, listeners, do have a look for us on Instagram or LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter.
We will share it.
You will share it.
Do not worry. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, I'm not on Twitter as part of the problem. There you go. But I'm on the other three, so it's easier. Okay, thank you very much. Much appreciated.
No problem. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
This podcast was recorded in Granite Podcast Studio. Interested in starting up your own podcast but don't know how? Granite Podcast Studio can help. Record your podcast in our state-of-the-art studio, which is based in the heart of Newry City. Our studio has cutting-edge and user-friendly technology and can seat up to 4 people. We also provide an editing service for our team, using your guidance and editing notes to provide you with a flawless finished product, leaving your listeners wanting more. For more information on how you can get started, visit www.granitepodcaststudio.com.